Hello and welcome to the Oslo project update for the Open Infra Summit in Shanghai. My name is Ben Nemec and I'm the Oslo PTL. You can see my contact details on the screen there. So this is just an outline of what we're going to be talking about today. First of all, I'll go over a little bit about what Oslo is and why it exists. Then we'll talk about the work that we have been doing and that we will be doing. Then we'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved if you're interested. And since this is a recording, obviously there won't be questions, but do feel free to leave comments on the video if you have questions. So what is Oslo? You can see the mission statement right there, but in essence, Oslo is a place for all of the common code in OpenStack to live. So, for example, most projects need messaging. Most projects need database. Well, it doesn't make sense for them to all implement their own layers for that. So what we've done is we've put all of that code into an Oslo library, and then everybody can use the same copy of the code. We only have to do one set of maintenance on that code, and everybody benefits from bug fixes and new features and all of that. Our team is a combination of kind of two different groups of people. We have the generalist code reviewers and the specialist API maintainers. The generalists are sort of overall cores. They have +2 on all repos in Oslo, and these are people who have demonstrated that they understand API design and just general good code hygiene. And so they try to kind of review things for overall appropriateness. And yeah, so that's what they do. Then the other side is the specialist API maintainers. And those people are experts in a specific area, like, say, messaging or database. And so they may only have core on one specific repo, but they're super important to making sure that the changes that we're making to those projects are correct from a implementation detail level. So one side is kind of looking at the higher level picture of how does this fit into OpenStack and Oslo. The other side is, okay, is this correct for this particular problem domain? We have around 40 projects in Oslo, and it covers things like messaging, database config, and obviously 37 other things. And if you're interested in more details, we have a wiki page that contains links to most of the information that you would need. Things that we've gotten done in the past cycle. The first one I'm going to talk about is a fix or a workaround, depending on how you want to look at it, for an issue with RabbitMQ heartbeats when Eventlet and WSGI are combined. Most services aren't doing this, but Nova in particular had a situation where they needed Eventlet green threads in their API, and when you do that, you end up with Eventlet running in WSGI, and it turns out that doesn't work very well in some circumstances. So what we've had to do is move the heartbeat thread in Oslo messaging out of Eventlet and into a native thread. Now this is a little bit iffy because native threads and Eventlet threads don't necessarily always play nicely together. So for the moment, we've made this an opt-in fix. So if you're running into this problem, you'll want to set the option in your configs that I have documented here. And if we find from people who are doing this that they're having good luck with it and it's fixing the problem and it's not causing any stability issues, then we'll make this a default behavior and deprecate the option. We also did a little bit of feature work in Oslo messaging this cycle. So we added a RabbitMQ mandatory flag, and what this does is it makes a failure to send a message a more immediate failure. So in the past, it was possible that you could try to send a message and it wouldn't go through, and you might not actually find that out until you just didn't get a response to your message or whatever. So what this does is it makes a failure to send in a message an immediate error and returns right away, tells you, hey, yep, something went wrong, you need to recover. This is kind of more what people expect from behavior out of their messaging library, so this is a really good thing. To implement this, we created a kind of general driver options framework because we didn't want to do this in a driver-specific manner, even though this is a driver-specific option, because this is just a quirk of how Rabbit works. we wanted to make this kind of driver agnostic. So we created this new transport options class, and that's what's responsible for specifying options like this. And so if another driver has a similar sort of configuration option, they could implement their version of this at least once, which is kind of our generic name for the mandatory flag. They could implement their driver's version of this, and then they would anybody who's using Oslo messaging would benefit from that the same as they would if they were using Rabbit. And so you can see just the example here. You would create this transport options object, set at least once to true. Then when you create your client, you pass that in to the transport options parameter. And then now when you make calls, you're going to benefit from that option. And as you can see above, the documentation on the transport options class is lacking right now. I have a bug open. Hopefully we'll get that resolved shortly. For the moment, there's only the one option, so it's not such a big deal, but it's something we should really address. Another big bug that's kind of been an issue for a few cycles here and was causing quite a few different people grief was that Oslo service was not handling mutable config correctly. What it was doing was completely restarting services even though the mutable config option was set, so theoretically it should have just been reloading the config and leaving the service running. So this obviously caused some problems because the services were not expecting that behavior. They were expecting everything to keep going, and so things like RPC were breaking after a mutable config. It's a SIG-HUP signal is how you do that. So the fix was basically to address that behavior. Now Oslo service is going to correctly not restart your service. It's just going to reload the config options and then keep the service running. For Nova in particular, which was one of the places that this was causing a lot of pain, it also required a fixed Oslo privsep because that wasn't gracefully handling a mutable config update either. So both of those changes have merged and they've been released as part of the train release. So if you're using train, you should benefit from them right away. You can always try to use the newer versions of the library with an older release if you're still running there and you're having this issue too, so that's something to keep in mind. It doesn't require any service-side changes. This is basically just making the Oslo pieces work the way that we said they were, so nothing to do outside of Oslo. Some things that I wanted to highlight that weren't necessarily completed work, although I guess the Python 3.7 community goal is completed work. We got all of the Oslo libraries compatible with Python 3.7 and they're now gating on it. We also deprecated the message.translate function in Oslo I18N, and the reason we did that is that message inherits from the Unicode object in the Python standard library, and the Unicode object already has a function named translate, and so if someone tried to call the standard library translate on a message object, they got ours instead and things blew up. So we've renamed our version to message.translation. Hopefully most projects are not even going to notice this. The documented entry point for doing message translation is actually not to call this function directly, it's to call a function in Oslo I18N, which then calls message.translate, or translation now. So of course that function has been updated to use the new name, so in most cases there won't be any work needed on this either. But if you were for some reason calling message.translate directly, you'll need to update that. I also wanted to note that we've dropped the work for pluggable policy at this point. We had started looking into this and we thought there was more interest than there was. After doing some more investigation, it turns out that people weren't calling for this quite as much as we thought. So we've deprioritized, and the work is still out there. If anybody's interested in picking it up, we'd certainly be interested in seeing that. But at the moment, we're not planning to pursue this any further. I will also note that since last summit, there was a much simplified version of this. Rather than writing a full plugin framework, it just provides a way for Oslo policy to send requests to an external HTTP endpoint. And we have an HTTP check already, but this kind of makes it cleaner to integrate and a little bit easier to use than having to rewrite everything to use HTTP check. So if you're interested in this, I would recommend taking a look at that. We haven't merged it. It's not 100% ready yet, but it wouldn't take a whole lot to get it into shape. So upcoming work that we have for this cycle. A lot of our work now is kind of driven as needed by the other OpenStack projects. We don't have a lot of huge Oslo-specific initiatives going on anymore. So primarily what we're doing is just kind of reacting to needs that the other projects have, and we don't necessarily know what those are at this point. We actually had no specs merged for the train cycle, although we did have some spec reviews that then kind of led to implementations. We didn't actually merge the specs because the specs ended up not reflecting the reality of the implementation, but we are still having design discussions, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Another thing that I think everybody's going to really like once we get it in is type hints, and we're waiting on being able to drop the Python 2.7 support from the Oslo libraries before we do this, because that allows us to use the Python 3 native version of type hints, which is a lot cleaner and won't require as much ongoing maintenance. So that's something we're really looking forward to, and hopefully that'll happen this cycle as we drop 2.7. Cross-project work, as you can probably guess, all of it is cross-project. We don't really have any non-cross-project code in Oslo. If we do, it probably should be somewhere else. Specifically, we're still looking for, and we're actually looking for help at this point on Oslo Limit, which is our common quota library. Currently, all of the quotas in the OpenStack services are implemented by each service, which is exactly the kind of situation that we're trying to avoid by having Oslo. Unfortunately, this is a fairly big piece of work, and we're having trouble finding enough people to work on it. We do have most of the implementation of Oslo Limit done already. We just need some help to kind of push this across the finish line and then help get it implemented in all of the services. We're also always looking for people to implement the Oslo config drivers for secret storage, because I know that's something people have wanted for a long time. This is mostly a deployment project thing. The services themselves don't actually need to change in order to use Oslo config drivers. That's completely transparent to them. So that's another thing that we're always looking to help out with. And then, of course, just in general, we are always looking to make updates to projects that are using deprecated features from Oslo so that we can get those features removed and stop maintaining them. For example, the message.translate. Before we remove that, we'll go out and make sure that nobody's still using it, and if they are, we'll help them get rid of it. If you want to contact us, we are still on Launchpad, and we're OpenStack Oslo on Freenode. We use the Oslo tag on the OpenStack Discuss mailing list, and we will be at the PTG on Wednesday afternoon. So if you are there in person, please do come by and say hello. Hello. If you're interested in contributing, know that you don't have to be full-time. I'm not full-time, and I'm the PTL, so we're very friendly to that sort of contribution. If you want to get started, go find a project that sounds interesting, review the code, fix the bugs. I think almost all of our projects have at least one bug open on Launchpad, so you shouldn't have trouble finding one. You can also triage bugs. That's always appreciated. You don't have to know all of Oslo to contribute. It's kind of one of the nice things about Oslo is that it's 40 largely self-contained smaller projects, so your learning curve is a lot smaller with Oslo than it might be with some of the bigger service projects. And we actually really like having experts in particular areas because it makes the overall Oslo team's life a whole lot better if we can kind of rely on expert reviews from people who really know the topic. And I put this call out there every time, and we have had some luck finding new owners for some of the libraries I've listed here, but we'd really still like to have more because these are hugely important libraries for all of OpenStack. Almost everybody is using some of these, and we'd really like more people to adopt some of these, like PrivSep, because that improves the security of OpenStack hugely. Unfortunately, the people who were originally our experts on these services have left OpenStack, so we're kind of left with a vacuum of skill here. So if you're interested, these are good places to start. And as I said, you'll have to leave questions in the comments because I can't do that when this isn't live. So that's all I had, and thanks for watching.